Hello, I am Cabbage9, and this is a Crazy House World Championship candidates match between JannLee and Bugzilla. Both of them are strong Crazy House players and have been for a while. And oh my goodness. Oh no, okay, sorry. Both of them are strong Crazy House players from Australia. And so this will be an interesting match. Also, just a small note that right now is 7 a.m. Australian time. So it's bright and early for both of them. While we wait for the first moves, we can also look at the standings. I think it might be a bit cut off, but I'll try to see what I can do. Sorry, I'm figuring out how to use OBS. Oh, and meanwhile, hello, train flipper. Well, anyways, if you type CWC, the command, in the Twitch chat, then you'll be able to see this link to the full calendar view. Anyways, the game has started. So you see a very typical fianchetto structure that has shown up in a lot of games. Usually, JannLee plays the non-fianchetto side, and he's really well known for a thematic queen sacrifice. When black plays knight h5, JannLee really likes to snap the knight off. And in Crazy House, this is considered a sacrifice, but it's a positional sacrifice right after the pawn leaves, and you'll get the f5 score for the knight and decent compensation. And the queen isn't really that easily used because the position's still rather close. Okay, so black plays bishop g4 to provoke f3 because white doesn't want to trade off the knight. And now white sets up g4, which is interesting. So white goes for a really aggressive kingside pawn storm. h5 is probably the idea here. If this were a normal chess game, which it still could be, this would be the Yobava London system, which is also an aggressive opening. Typically in fianchetto structures, black will want to play h6, but at this point in the game, given that white will be easily able to place a diag on g5, then it's probably a lot less good to play h6 because it will make it easier for white to be able to trade their way into the position. Hello, Gingerbread Man, ZH, GM and Neas. Sorry, I mispronounced your names. Okay, Queen c8, eyeing the g4 square. Since white's king is really open, then black would want to try to sacrifice a piece for 2 pawns. That is definitely a possibility. And then maybe the pawns could be placed on light squares to try to punish white for playing such risky moves. Also, black is not giving white a lot of pieces to capture or trade off. For example, if white had a pawn in hand, pawn h6 would be pretty much automatic, I think. But the only pawn sacrifice is knight takes d5, so that's not super good. It's not worth it to sack the knight just to drop a pawn here, because, for example, after knight takes, say h6, then black can take the bishop. And then if white takes here, then all of a sudden e3 opens up and these squares are pretty scary. It's okay, white plays h5. Black decides to play bishop takes g4, but white ignores the bishop. And all of a sudden this h file is open. And yeah, white has a pawn in hand, so h6 would make sense here. Or taking the bishop off first. Also, black cannot. Actually, black can. I was going to say something about how d5 is hanging, but knight takes g4 actually threatens pawn at f2. So since black has 2 pawns, black first lures the king to f2 to keep the initiative and takes this. And then the king can't run back here, obviously, because of f2. So there's a few choices. White could go king g3, which looks really dangerous. Also, if white goes king g2, then black can actually take on f4 and have this knight e3 fork. That's an idea. Hello, Zixon. Hello, entire sleeve. H5. Let's see. I feel like h5 is actually good and would have been good for black because it frees up the h7 square, provided that this is sufficiently defended. Okay, so JannLee chooses king e2, which is the safe move. So without a rook or a knight, it's going to be hard to actually get to this king because all these light squares are controlled or under control. Both players down to around 30 seconds on move 13, so this is quite a rich position. Bishop takes g6, yeah, and then with the idea if h takes, then white can drop a bishop on h7. And all of a sudden this black king starts feeling a bit more exposed. And then even after it takes, white might even sack a second bishop if they wanted to at some point. That would be a way into the position afterwards. 3 pawn g2. So now black might drop a bishop on f1, or they might drop a pawn on f2, or both. But we can see sort of white's king is actually really safe. Unless black gets a knight for c4, white's pretty safe here. Meanwhile, black is also somewhat safe, but it's a bit more iffy. Okay. He didn't really like going all in for the attack. He's just sort of just grabbing pieces to. You can see he's dropping them around his king, so his king's actually really safe here. You can notice all these pieces, and he still has the initiative afterwards. So now bishop d3 will cover the c4 check with the knight, and then these pawns will be used at some point to infiltrate, like pawn g6, pawn h6 looks strong. Oh, does this work? I feel like this was maybe a slight mistake. Oh wait, maybe there's rook h7, rook g7. Actually, yeah, I think that was mating, like rook h7, rook takes g7 to get rid of his last defender around his king. Okay, we have a few moves. JannLee down to 5 seconds. So it'll be a lot harder to play in a really short position like this one. c3, knight takes, d2 expected, and rook c1 ideas. So he has to take with the queen. Now he has to block. But then there's a knight at e2. No, that doesn't work. Okay, so queen takes d1, knight takes, knight at e2, king takes d2 is forced, and then queen at e1, king d3. Nope, he doesn't go for it. But actually, all of a sudden, white is the one who has initiative. He can even take on c4 afterwards. Yeah, I think queen takes d1 was mate. Oh. And it looks like JannLee will take the first game. This is a pretty hard threat to counter. Queen takes g7 and rook at g8. Okay, we're on to the second game, 1-0 in favor of JannLee. We have a e4, e5 position. We're opening. I don't know this too well because I don't play e4, but supposedly bishop c5 is really bad for black, and bishop e7 and move 3 is the main line, or one of the main lines. JannLee sacrifices a pawn to get his pieces into the game. Also note he played king h8, so now white doesn't have the intermediate check. Knight takes f6. Oh, okay, so in the previous game, Zixon says there was king f8 after rook takes g7, but I was thinking after that you can go rook g8, maybe? Probably there was something. Okay. I can look at a bunch of these games after the match ends too. Just like a quick overview of each one, because I'm sure they'll all be interesting. And sorry I'm lagging a bit. I don't know why my internet's so bad today, but the moves we missed were blocks, which makes sense, and they play c3 to control d4. This is also really common in e4, e5 positions. So now this knight is a bit less useful. It's sort of out of the game at the moment, because this would have been its only entry point. Oh no. Sorry, my internet's just not working. Okay. What happens next? here, okay. So JannLee tries to get in on the dark squares by sacrificing the bishop for this pawn and then targeting this pawn. Also note his king's really safe right now. It's not easy for white to get in. Bugzilla tries to sacrifice material back, but I think he can actually take on... No, probably this is better. Oh no, I disconnected again. I'm going to take a moment to close a lot of tabs. Hopefully that will help. Oh, sorry. I usually don't predict matches, Gingerbread, because my predictions are always wrong. If I were to predict something, say like 7-6 for JannLee, seems reasonable. I don't want to like accidentally cause. You know how they say cast or curse. JannLee plays queen takes h3, very interesting decision. So he trades queens essentially. Which is justified because, once again, no, this king side is untouched. It's really not possible for Bugzilla to get in, which means he's going to spend a majority of the time defending for the rest of the game. He might have all this material over here, and JannLee only has like 2 pieces, but still, and Jin will still probably prefer black in this position. Okay, so Bugzilla tries to start a counterattack. This is a strong move because it also covers e3. And JannLee immediately just defends instead of doing anything else. Or he counters it, that's a better way to put it. Bugzilla down to 20 seconds. While JannLee still has 2 minutes plus on the clock. Knight at f5. So now actually this is not really that scary of a threat, because after queen takes, knight takes, the knight's going to be on g7. Which gives black extra time to do stuff. So what does black want to do here? Maybe he might take the rook. Oh, I closed Twitch chat. Huh, okay, let me see if I can reopen it. Okay, chat is back, and yes, we do indeed see he took the rook, and now there's a knight on g7, and JannLee is going to take this opportunity to try to build something up. So, for example, he could get his knight into the game with knight e5, so he has to calculate, like, after takes, if he puts a bishop on h4 and then king takes, is this actually good or not? Or maybe instead of a bishop, he could put like a pawn here. Or he could even go bishop e5 if he doesn't see anything, and his king will be very safe here. But he has time to think. This knight is what many would call a friend of the king. Because white has to move it out of the way to get anything in. Okay, and he goes knight e5. Now pawn at f4. So if white actually goes king back, then JannLee can drop a bishop here. So white has to go forward, but now knight takes d3 will protect both knights at the same time and give a check. And now bishop at f4 is probably mating. King here, rook f2, king here, and pawn c2. And also if white goes king d4, then black can even push a pawn to checkmate instead. Okay, solid mate by JannLee. Yeah, I was also thinking bishop takes f2 instead of knight takes f2 for that game. But yes, having knight takes d3 as an option is useful. Okay, we have a third game. JannLee again has the London system set up. Bugzilla trades on d3, which will give white an extra pawn here. This is a very common pawn structure. So usually in d4, d5 setups, both players trade a lot and try to fight for squares. So for example, this pawn will cover this e4 square, which could be used by black to do things. White may also, with the knight on e2, white may try to play f3 at some point, which would cover this square. Meanwhile, black plays a6 to cover this square, so now this knight's prospects are a bit more reduced. White plays knight g3, this knight could go to h5, it could also support something on h5, for example, take knight at h5. That could happen. I don't think it's the best move though. Both players castle, black plays rook c8 to try to just cover the c7 pawn and also prepare an eventual c5. You can't play right now though, because white has two bishops targeting this one. White also doesn't really need to play f3 immediately, although this is a good move in this type of position. Oh, JannLee plays king h1, so I remember his king h8 from last game. This king's going to be very safe, especially after this knight goes to g1, that covers this h3 square. And then white plays f3, and white's going to be like very, very safe. So it plays knight g4, taking advantage of the fact that this diagonal is blocked, but is it even good? Because now white gets the chance to play bishop takes g7, getting into the black structure, and also getting a pawn to fight for the dark squares on e5. Knight h5 is definitely going to happen at some point. Although maybe not now that it's not check anymore. Or it does. It's a very natural square for the knight to go to because there's no pawn to kick it out. And also now this knight sees more dark squares, so we can see white's trying to get the dark squares. Oh, nice. Yeah, I don't follow tennis as much as everyone else does, but it sounds interesting. So while black is up on material, it's still a bit hard to. It's going to be a bit harder to play because white has more board presence. Like the center, white has better center control and strong dark control. So black drops down a bishop just to try to counter white's influence on the dark squares. This is a good defensive piece. It can also be traded for this knight at some point, although that's a lot less likely. So what will white do now? Rook takes c7 could be an option, although it probably doesn't do anything. White could try to drop a piece on g7 to interrupt the rook's protection of this knight. For example, rook at g7. Oh, okay. The safer alternative, rook at f4. Hitting both this, and also this knight moves are also hits the bishop. Ah, there we go. Okay, this is a very common defensive idea in d4 structures. Because one way for the opponent to get into the position is to drop a pawn here. So if you put a bishop here, not only do you stop the pawn, you also reinforce g2. So that if black tries to drop a pawn on f3, then you don't immediately have to defend it. It's very common. Knight takes h2. Now white has two choices. He can go take the bishop or the knight. Takes a knight, which makes more sense. Right, this knight sitting the rook. Black drops a bishop on g5 to control more dark squares. But now I think white can actually maybe consider taking on f5. And if he takes f5, bishop takes f5, then there's a potential switch to the light squares. So dropping on e6, taking on targeting f7, for example. So white does take on f5. Now we see how does black defend this pawn? Well, there's a few ways. One of them is to drop an obstacle on f6 to block its path. It's probably the better way to go about this. Black would really like to have a bishop here, but they used it for g5 earlier. Also, you can see this X-ray or potential discovered attack on the queen. So this queen moves out of the way. But now, yes, e6, as I said earlier. Trying to get into the dark squares. White can even take on f7. Or put a pawn on g7. Actually, there's a lot of options here to consider. Now white has to take the knight because black is trying to get in on the dark squares. Now this is forced. Now black tries to win a rook to threaten mate or something close to mate. So we can see sort of how white grabbing the knight leads to black getting enough time to start mount a counterattack, and how black grabbing white's queen gives enough time for white to win the game. But yeah, these d4, d5 positions can look quite calm, but some of them are pretty sharp. Once all the pieces get in their places, then it is pretty tense. It becomes more tense. Okay, now it's the score is 3-0 JannLee. And Bugzilla plays an opening that I play in 3-check. Okay. So we've seen early queen trade. The king goes to d1, which means it loses its rights to castle. Also makes the f2 score a bit weaker, so if black had a knight, then knight e4 would be pretty strong. I don't think white got what they wanted out of this opening. Perhaps it's just for variety. Black tries to force things. For example, let's say white goes knight g5, which would be a pretty big mistake. Then black can actually take on e2, trade the bishops, even trade the queens, drop a bishop on d3, and there's a lot of it. Having queens that are eyeing each other gives rise to a lot of quick mates. So white plays pawn at d5. This knight is not going to move. Or if it were to move, the only square it could move safely to is b8, and there's no way that's happening. I think a good response would be e6, and then flying to d8 with pawn takes c6. Keeping this file open, but also having pawns on c6 would control everything. JannLee opts with putting the bishop on c6 instead. Though there's an intermediate move, pawn at e6. But it doesn't look too scary because white doesn't have any follow-up after f takes. We can also see how with white's king on d1, it makes it a lot harder to synchronize or harmonize the pieces. This rook's not going to get a lot of prime time in this game. And the bishop is a bit hindered by the queen. Okay, JannLee actually takes with the pawn instead of the bishop. I guess so we can think about this as a pawn, or diagonal pieces. So black has a pretty good defensive setup around the king. So plays knight at a6. Wow, okay. What does he want? Okay, so let's say we take the knight, which looks like the obvious move, and white might want to put a pawn on b7 and try to win this rook. For example, takes pawn at b7, say the rook moves, then white can even take twice and drop the rook on a8, and that wins the queen. However, JannLee doesn't have to. Actually, JannLee doesn't have to move the rook. Okay, this is a surprisingly strong move. Okay, so takes b7. If the rook moves, then it's definitely going to be lost. Maybe JannLee will play knight at e6 to cover the c7 square, and then just give the queen away after take, and then like rook at b8. White can still win the queen, but maybe just give it away as forced. We can sort of see how these pieces are undefended, which makes this king a bit more exposed whenever this stuff happens on the queen side. I definitely underestimated the power of this setup. So this is the safe option, which if you don't have any idea what to do, now rook at b8 will come and take, rook at d8, or maybe pawn at d6. Although it may not be so safe after all. Bugzilla finds forced mate. So if the king went back to c8, there would be a bishop at d7, and then if the king goes up here, queen at a6, and then queen c8. So black has to go up. Now queen c6. I think bishop at f4 is more accurate. Before queen at c6 to cut off the square. Queen e4 check. Okay. And then now bishop at e5 is the next move. No matter which way he goes. Or is it? No, now bishop at h4 and knight d7 is me. Okay, well, he's gonna have me. There's a very strong find by Bugzilla to close out game 4. Okay, we see a return of the London system because so far it has a 100% win rate. Bugzilla tries d6, which usually pairs with, okay, the wolf defense, d6, e6, bishop e7, bishop d7, knight f6, knight c6, knight f6. It's a very common opening in Crazy House where you just like sit in this, barricade the center, and play more defensively. Okay, Bugzilla decides, okay, I'm gonna trade pieces. So he takes the knight and then he does a pawn fork. So that essentially gives him this piece back. Although this tempo, sometimes with this tempo, white is able to do interesting things. For example, knight at f5 would hitting g7 could be an idea. There are these intermediate moves in Crazy House that can really change the outcome of the game. Now bishop h6, hitting g7. It's interesting. And the idea with this is that if you take on h6, then I can go knight takes and I can move my other knight to f5. Alternatively, there's also knight takes e7, queen takes, and bishop g5, with the idea to play knight d5, taking advantage of this pin. There's quite a few options for white. G5 gives to g7 square. Good catch, 6. Sometimes when you have a critical point in the game like this one, where you see 2 or more options that both look equally good, then you may end up using a big chunk of your time to calculate. In this case, white's going to be down to 1 minute, thinking about which plan to go for, because in Crazy House, these plans are not very reversible. Okay, so white opts for the safe bishop b3, planning to respond to takes with knight takes, and we get a normal position like we did before. But now black has the initiative. This bishop on g3 is purely defensive. It doesn't really have any prospects on this diagonal. And also because the bishop is removed from this diagonal, it's gonna make it a lot harder for white to actually get any play. Well, we can see black's bishop is well placed on the corresponding diagonal. And at g2, white goes king d2. If you put the king 3 squares away from the knight, then you can't get checked by that knight. What happened here? Pawn f4, take, take, take. So black gets the rook, but white is now up a pawn because the rook and the knight are worth the same amount in Crazy House. Also, we can see this nice piece shelter around white's king. So black tries to pry that open with pawn break. Now if white plays e5, black will play knight e4. So white plays knight f5, saying, okay, here's a free pawn. I'm gonna attack instead. So h6, idea h takes b7, knight at h6. And without a rook in hand, black decides to play g6. But actually this weakens the dark square. So now JannLee immediately hops on and takes advantage of it by dropping a knight on d5 to target this. If black takes, black is for sure going to lose the queen. After, I think bishop takes e3 is safer. Oh, I just didn't see this. Okay. Well, that still doesn't. Well, we can still see these dark squares are very weak. So white's able to plant a knight on f6. That's game over. Of course, it's not that easy to do, but with this many diags, white sets up for knight f6 right now. White can drop a pawn on g7 or e5 or somewhere. And meanwhile, black does not have an easy way of getting to white's king, because this bishop covers both these checks, the queen covers this check. And this pawn is defended now. Bugzilla defends this. But now, yeah, pawn f6. And if take, then white can do it in knight on g4. So he has to avoid. But now knight at e7 with the queen. So that was a minor slip. Sometimes it happens where you reject a move, and then the move he plays even worse. Or that's what I do a lot of the time. So it happens sometimes. And with that, JannLee now is up 4-1. Bugzilla tries the same opening that worked for him last time, except JannLee plays bishop f5 instead of d4 from the previous game, which looks like a sort of like a mirrored London system. It will look a lot more like it when this happens. Okay, black takes advantage of white not playing e3 to go d4 and win a piece. I believe that whenever you have a two-knight setup and the opponent plays like d4, I think Engine says this is the best move, which doesn't make 100% sense. Doesn't make sense to me yet, but hopefully it will soon. So white now has one more pawn and more center presence because of the pawns compared to black. There's this really beautiful center. If black goes queen a5, the queen may actually be trapped after b4, queen a4, and bishop b5 check. Like if the queen is here, white always has this very thematic move. Or it's not thematic. It's just a common pattern when you can lure the queen to b5 and you can go knight takes c7 and fork it. So there are some couple of options here. Once again, black could take the knight, which I don't think is that good here. Play queen d6, but that might fall to bishop f4. And then maybe give up the queen for the bishop instead. Or just give up the queen entirely for a few pawns. I think bishop takes e4. Or you could even go queen b6, but no, it's not. Okay, so bishop f4, and now he's probably going to sack his queen for the pawn and play like e6. Though the queen white can go queen c8 check, and knight takes c7, which looks normal. Or knight takes c7. Do not see this move. This is nice. White grabs a pawn. So now black has to be careful, right? Because white's threatening to play queen at c8 and queen at d. But if you move the knight, then white could also play bishop b5 now, which gets more pieces. Also, d5 is slightly scary with the ideas of like c6 and just dropping pawns on the light squares. Hello, author. Yes. Once again, we see a similar problem to game 4, where this entire king side is undeveloped, and white is able to break open the queen side and get a queen, which makes this king feel really exposed. Right, black is technically speaking, or not really anymore, but was up material. But if the material is all sitting here at home, then it's a bit harder to use. Now black's going to try to defend the king and make use of these pieces. For example, this bishop can come here to cover, and this knight can go somewhere. This is a strong move because not only is attacking the bishop, it's also attacking the rook. So the normal way to cover it would be to drop a piece on c8 to break off the pin, even that might fall to some trade ideas. JannLee resigns. Okay, now the score is 2-4 in favor of JannLee. We see the exact same wolf defense so, or we will after a few moves. Probably doesn't want to play bishop d3 because if knight takes d4, so he goes with bishop b5 instead. Second way, knight takes d4. It's actually very common in like standard chess as well. Not here though. Usually there's a bishop on c4 and there's a knight on c3 and black plays knight takes e4, takes in d5. Here it makes more sense to try to get white's dark squared bishop because this is the only one that's actually like near the king, whereas this light squared bishop is mostly for defense. Now Bugzilla gets an unopposed bishop on h6. What you remember from the game where JannLee played bishop h3, this is a really strong defensive piece. It's going to be really hard to make black for now. I would say black actually has the edge in this position. JannLee, there was a fork here. So he lost a piece. Black was able to place a knight on h4. Now we see a very, sort of like a mirror situation to the previous. to this game. Where now we see like black's attacking. Black is eternally safe with this bishop. And he's trying to get some more pieces to fuel the attack. So because this bishop's here, white's main plan of attack revolves around trying to get into this e7. Oh, or not, or maybe just take this pawn and be safe. This would be one idea, and then like if you put a knight on these squares and attack the bishop, the other idea is to put it here and try to infiltrate the back rank. JannLee opts for this one because he'll be able to get 2 pawns for the rook afterwards. This bishop on g4 sort of serves a similar purpose to the bishop on h6, where it's a really strong defensive piece. Black would really love to have a pawn in this position. But white has 10 of them, 9 of them. However, because the queen is on g2, it's probably going to be sacrificed at some point. And just because it's really hard to stop black from getting a diagonal, like a pawn or bishop to drop here. Also, we can see this bishop's still on h6. It's the same solid. White tries to drive it out. Oh wow, the queen is trapped. Well, I'll just take a moment because the game is still gonna be played for a while. We can see all the squares the queen can go to are all trapped, are all controlled. So Bugzilla gets a queen, but what can he do with it? Oh well, okay. He wins a bishop. Actually, that's really strong. So this is a miss. I think it's better to drop something on e3 to prevent this idea. So now Bugzilla should be relatively happy with this position. Though you may want a few more pieces. Like this queen's fate is probably going to be used. The queen will be sacrificed at some point. Perhaps for the knight, he decides that, oh, if you take here, I'm going to take g2. I'm trying to get in on the white squares, which is a strong idea. Take the rook. And now you can see these light squares are a bit airy. Yeah, it takes. So now the question is whether or not white has enough time to consolidate. White's essentially gonna try to keep some stuff around his king, and black's gonna try to get in around it. However, white's down to 11 seconds while black has a minute and a half, so it's looking pretty good. However, JannLee is a very resilient defender, so if there's anyone to save this position, it would be him. For example, in this position, If white were to be able to take this bishop, then all of a sudden there's a lot of attacking possibilities, like take, rook h8, king takes, pawn g7, or whatever. JannLee opts for defense first. So this Bugzilla trading off this knight to completely dissipate white's chances. That's why he drops the queen here to try to provoke him to take the queen instead of the knight. Knight at d1 is a strong move because the eyes f2. So now if black ever gets another knight, be able to take. What's the piece count, by the way? How we do it? So white has like 5 minor pieces, and black has, that would mean black has black has 9. So sort of like a war of attrition. Black's slowly gonna make white lose all the rest of their pieces. With each capture, black's getting more and more pieces. And yeah, white resigns. You can see white had the same number of like non-pawn pieces, but the number of pawns was dropping and the king was getting exposed. It's really, really hard practically to defend these positions. Okay, JannLee opts for a London setup this time in response to the exact same opening. Bugzilla played bishop f4 with the likely intention to play e3 after. Meanwhile, JannLee does something similar. There's always a chance of like knight h4, someone really moves. JannLee really wants to play d4. Just thinking that after knight b5, which forks these two pawns, that they'll probably have, I have no idea what he sees. So let's just win a pawn. Oh, he'll have, no, that doesn't work. I suppose that after knight takes d4, that he'll have what, bishop takes d3, or maybe that might be his intention, but even then, white still is really, really strong position. Okay, so now Bugzilla just gets a pawn for free. The game continues like nothing happened. White's already like much better just because of the extra pawn. Sorry about that. Bishop g5, will he sack his queen? Nope, he doesn't. So now with white placing the bishop here, now this becomes a bigger threat because the typical response to putting like a queen b4 check would be to put a bishop here to sort of protect the pawn. But now with the bishop on g5, white doesn't have a bishop to do that. So he's probably gonna, but if he goes here, he can drop a pawn here. But the worst case, he'll get like a pawn for a knight trade, which still seems forced because the queen has no other alternatives. But he could try to sack on one of these pawns first before taking on b2. In a way, he's sort of getting out-chessed. Okay, so he opts for the tempo instead of the material. Pawn at e5, now we see white's up a knight for, I think, nothing, so doesn't even have to move the knight. You can maybe say, oh, you can open this, you can take the knight and I'll get an open file for my queen. Or you can move the knight to g5 and just sack on f7. Okay, another intermediate move we see here, knight b5, which will win the pawn on c7 with the check. He also doesn't have to take this one immediately. He can go knight g5 first to save the knight if he wants. He opts for bishop takes c7. Now this opens up a possibility of knight d6 check because there's two knights here. So takes on e4, opens the file for the queen. Now queen pawn at d7 is a big threat. He has to address. Probably will drop the pawn on d4. Actually, it's interesting. So if you still put a pawn on d4 saying, can't take this because I can take this way and you can't move your queen because the rook, and you can't move this pawn because the bishop is pinned. But if pawn d4, knight takes, then white has the intermediate move pawn d7 and is able to pick up the knight with check. So he drops a pawn on d2 instead to try to close the file, but white would not be able to take this pawn because of this rook. And he tries to lure the queen off the d file. But he might have missed knight takes simply. Okay, well, he anticipates it, it seems, but I don't see how this is bad for white. After, say, the knight goes back to flat. Dixon says, rook takes b7 look good. Which move are you referring to? Oh yeah, interesting thing I see in the chat. Or not the Twitch chat, but this bishop was very stationary. But actually in this game now, this bishop is the one that hasn't moved out the whole game. So you can sort of see, like, when you involve more of your pieces in the game, then you'll get better results. Bugzilla drops a bishop here to try to defend the knight, so JannLee drops a pawn to block it, so now this knight has to move. But what's wrong with the knight moving? Is it because knight c4 is scary? I don't see why. Okay, Bugzilla tries to do something with, like, these two bishops and this king, but it's hard to get into this king because this d7 square is so well covered. Maybe there's something I'm missing here. Ah, oh, I see. He wants to go takes, and oh, that's always a big threat. Oh, okay, I'm totally missing it. But now queen takes b1, and look at d1 is made, and queen at c1. So JannLee finally defeats the opening. Okay, we see the exact same game as before. But now it's a real one instead of the pawn gets put on e3 instead of e4, so it's a bit less ambitious, but it's more so, because now there's no knight takes d4 sacrifice. So this knight will be out of the game for a while. Unless black tries to play for e5. What Jay is doing, I think. Like, he's targeting this bishop, which is defending e5. Takes this, now the bishop will go on h6, maybe. We can also push f5. Without a pawn on g5, this bishop's really strong. Now you can block. Yeah, white's threatening this pawn, so there's two ways to block, and I think both of them are good. A really common defensive idea is to sort of set up a pawn square. So black gets another like diag or something. And the king will be very solid the whole game. Now it's sort of morphed into a stonewall setup. So you can see white has a bunch of weak white squares, but black doesn't have anything to take advantage of it. She has bishop d6 to try to sack on f4 to get some pawns. White's actually slowly getting outmaneuvered. So because of that, white blocked on e5, and now we see knight at e4, which makes sense. Black has control of the light squares, and white has control of the dark squares. This is pretty common. It sort of arises from d4, d5, or having these pawns here in the first place. Then this pawn will support something on e5, which in turn supports more dark squares. Bishop d7, bishop d2, so now JannLee tries to set up a defensive setup or defensive structure for the king. Around front page of HS TV, let me check. No, we're actually not, so I'm not sure what the thing's going to be. Oh, go home. Yes. Yeah, I remember that. King h8, logical move. Black honestly doesn't really have much. Or in order to get more going, Black will have to make some sacrifices at some point. Same thing with white, just to get pawns on g4 and g5. Alternatively, white can also put a bishop on h2, but it's passive. Maybe bishop on h4 is a bit stronger. It will support something on g5. h3 sort of controls the white squares, so along with the bishop. White goes knight h4, interesting decision to trade queens. Also, this knight's now a bit more active because it's hitting g6, so black plays bishop e8 to cover both g6 and the queen. But now, bishop f3 will drive this queen back to f7. Oh, he sacks on h4. Okay, so JannLee isn't doing the queen sacking, apparently. I feel like the name should be reversed now. So this is still a sacrifice, and Crazy House terms the queen is worth 4, a knight's worth 2, and a pawn's worth 1, so that's a sacrifice of like 1 point-ish. But Black will also gobble up this pawn, which will definitely help cement control of these dark squares. Knight at g6, at some point to hit h4 looks strong. White wants to take on e6, and this will also cover knight f4 check ideas. Black can continue the dark square infiltration with knight takes f2. e6, knight e7 to cover g6. Again. Just cover that. And e7 to cover g6. Yeah, usually we see a knight on e7. Not here, but yeah, so Bugzilla says, okay, if you take one of my rooks, I get this knight fork. So now I win your queen, but does a queen do that much? Maybe he could also. Okay, he takes the knight because now he's threatening knight at g3 check. And also, the other reason to take the knight is now we can see what's on this half of the board. Only white's piece, or only black's pieces. So it's very solid. Or it's just, this king is very safe. This king is also decently safe. It's a lot less safe compared to black's king. Now he's probably calculating if queen at g1 check works, which it doesn't really work. So I go for a safer option. And I want to either take one of these. Yeah, you're probably taking this one. Maybe drop a rook on g1 at some point. Like right now. No, not right. Oh, wait. So rook at g1 was a threat because if the king lever lands on one of these two squares, black can play knight up through check. I mean, white has no way like into black's king. His king was very safe. So I'd say white's like totally lost here. This time situation isn't helping either. Okay, match score 5-4. This is the last game. And we see a very common fianchetto setup. Early knight b5 is typically not so good for white. Because not only does black get this, but also black will get the e4 square. Now that white has surrendered it. And if white goes knight c3, then that's equivalent to a waste of 2 tapping. Bishop e5 is a common chess move, trying to neutralize this bishop. JannLee hangs a pawn. Tries to justify it by taking more pawns. Maybe it would take c2 even, and pawn h3. No, sorry. Would take c2. White will respond not with takes, but with knight takes f5. This already doesn't look so good for white though. Yeah, usually you have to play like c6 instead of c5 just to kick the knight away. Hopper says they should play more. Yes, they should. Enforce mandatory tie breaks. Seems in the middle of this match, Bugzilla finally crossed, with his last win, Bugzilla crossed the final hurdle to reach 100 wins or points. Bugzilla plays pawn at g4, which is a pawn sacrifice. We'll see how well it works out for him. I have a feeling pawn at d6, so pawn at e6 is okay. So the idea is to cut off this bishop. And we take, then he wins the bishop. Sorry. Of course, he doesn't have to take the pawn. He can also take this pawn and first do something else, for example. Or retreat the knight, which makes sense. So now the fight will be over the controlled dark squares. Or light squares, or just in general squares around this king. For example, bishop at f5 here would be interesting, right? Because after it takes, you can go knight at h5. And then if they don't take, you can also go knight at h5. It doesn't play it though. This bishop is really good, well placed here because it covers the f4 square. Okay, now I'll go knight at h5, I see. I don't have to immediately, actually. I can go knight at c5, targeting the pawn and the queen, which might force JannLee to sack the queen. At this point in the match, both players will be pretty tired because they've played 9 great games so far. Very high quality. So JannLee will finally do his queen sacrifice. Bishop at c8, maybe. Of course, he could also try queen d6, but no, he cannot try queen d6. Maybe he'll go knight at g5 and then take h3. That's like a very low percent chance of happening. Another thing is he can always do this in between when bishop takes h2, because if king takes, then you fork the... Oh, actually, that doesn't even work. I can show that later. White, the idea is white drops the knight on f4 and then is able to fork. But now that white has the queen, we can see black's dark squares look a bit airy. Bishop d6, an attempt to try to regain control of the dark squares. White will be able to grab a bishop for 3 and threaten knight takes e6. And once again, we see this pattern. King on h1, bishop on h3. Safe and solid. This bishop on h3 is like so useful. 98 check. Take. And JannLee doesn't really have that much material to defend himself, but bishop at h8 is game over. Of course, this is also game over. There are many routes to game over for this. He can take on c7 if he wants to. And drop a bishop on e7. Yes, very powerful match. Oh, b4. So painful. He's taking his time. Knight takes with the idea of you take with a pawn, you can drop a rook on f7 and snap off d7. Or put a bishop here, or do whatever you want, honestly. Yeah, played really well. But it's sort of like, if he didn't blunder this pawn on a7, it wouldn't have snowballed to this extent, but usually, like, when you lose a pawn for no compensation in greatly helps, it's worth a lot more than in normal chess because you can reuse the pawn afterwards. But yeah, JannLee resigns, and we have a tied match, 5-5. Good games. I'll look over some of the game. I'm gonna stay for a bit longer. Otherwise, that's the match. Thanks to everyone for watching. Okay, let's look at the first one. There's a point I just wanted to check here. Yeah, it was mating, right? You go here, 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 and then you go rook g8, just double. With the idea that the king can't run anymore. Oh, actually, let me go slow. Okay, so we're suggesting or calculating, right? So in this position, does white have mate? Because it looks like white only has, like usually there's an idea with like pawn here and rook here, it doesn't work out. So we see go rook here and king here, and if you go pawn here, and then black will king f8 and you run out. But then you notice this, you can have this rook takes g7 move, and if black takes, then you can go bishop at h6 to cover the escape square. Let me make sure this is. And then you have just enough pawns to mate. But yeah, after king f8, there's rook g8. And now the king has to come back, and then I assume pawn f7. Oh, I guess bishop f7 is better because you want to cover g6. The idea with this is after king h8, you go here, here, and then push. And this bishop defends the pawn. So the king has to go back, and then you mate. So he like barely has enough to mate, but yeah, it's a nice mate. Yeah, I would love to see tiebreaker. Just to commentate even more. Or just watch, learn technique and stuff. It's interesting how he managed to win with knight f3, knight c3, which is my main bug house opening, honestly. I don't think there was mismate. I don't think there was any more mismates, right? No, okay. Oh, there's one over here. Yeah, and the people in the chat were suggesting, what if queen takes d1, which makes sense, right? Like if you go king takes, then this is mate. So if we go knight takes, and then now you have knight. How do you get this king out? Well, I have a knight, so I can go knight 2 check. And I cover this square, so I can take, and I cover this square. So I can go like queen at e1 check here, and this has to be mate, right? You have 2 rooks. I mean, engine says knight takes, or sorry, knight takes f4 check is winning because of bishop 5, I assume. And like, if you block it, then look at e3, and that's mating. If you push, probably also something similar, honestly. This is a very common theme, though. Like if you're calculating and you see that at some point white can keep running away from your queen, then you can try to drop a piece to block it. Bishop checks very common. Okay, it's the main line. Just trying to see. But yeah, that was a strong. Those were some strong games from both players, and Bugzilla performed very well. Okay, thanks for watching, everyone. We'll probably cover a match in the future at some point. We'll see which one. You can always check the calendar. You can hit exclamation mark calendar to see when the next events are. Oh, actually, yeah, sure. I'm free, so I can stay for a bit if y'all want to. Suggest any more games to look at? I have a 60-minute or 60-second time delay, so I don't know how to change it midstream, but yeah.